The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn series. We're actually up to our last session today, so I just do a quick sound check to make sure that I'm being heard. So could I ask you just to go to the question box and just type in the word clear, just to make sure that yeah, thanks Kelly. Thanks John. Thanks Mark. Thanks Moya. Thanks John. Thank you. Okay, good. That's all great. Now, this is our last session, of course, and I hope you've got something useful out of the process as we've gone through it. But I want to talk about relationship building conversations today. Now, all of us at some point, and perhaps even now, have had or do have relationships that are not really where they need to be. Maybe there's a little lack of trust, or maybe there's a lack of communication, or we don't understand the other person, or whatever. You all know, of course, what I'm talking about. Now, these things don't just magically improve themselves. Sometimes they do, but it's very rare. Normally they get worse, actually. So if the relationship, of course, is of concern or interest to you, in other words, you have to work with that person on a regular basis, then I want to share with you during our session today on some tips and hints on how to improve the working relationship that you might have with other people and why that's important. Now, of course, if those people are part of your team, then you probably want to get the best out of those people. And clearly, if the working relationship isn't ideal, then you probably, it'll be in your interests and hopefully in their interests as well to try to work on improving that working relationship. So we've all got cases like that, either in the past or currently, or maybe it's your boss. Maybe I don't have the most wonderful working relationship with my boss. Is there anything I can do about this? Well, certainly I'm going to give you some things that you might want to think about in relation to that. All right, so you can see there on the screen now we've got to our last topic, and it's gone really quickly, actually. Don't know how you feel about that, but it has gone quickly. I hope you've been able to implement a few things and have better quality conversations. So I'll of course send you out the slides and the recording, or at least they'll be posted on the learning platform. And just be aware that the learning platform won't be available for too much longer, because I will take your name off the learning platform at some point. So I'm probably talking a few days. So my suggestion to you is to get in and have a look at the slides or do the exercises in there as soon as possible, because I'm going to put a deadline on that for the next group that comes in, so to speak. So there's only a sort of a limited number of spaces that I've purchased on that site. So you're out and the new comes in. So get in quickly, I guess, is the point I want to make there with you. So I want to go through the 5 steps that you can use to build better working relationships up, particularly when it comes to relationship building. I'll share with you some tools around how you can do that, and I'll talk about some barriers to better relationships, what sort of things will potentially get in the way that prevent you from having those good working relationships with people. It's impossible to have a good working relationship with everybody. It just doesn't work that way. Human nature is what it is. But I think, whatever we might be able to do to just improve our capacity to communicate and work effectively with other people, those particularly that we need to work effectively with, is obviously in your interests. And that's what I want to refer to today. Now, the 5 different steps, or the 5 steps in terms of building good working relationships up with people, are on your screen right now. So there's show up, listen up, speak up, lift up, and follow up. And I'll run through those with you, and I'll just talk about each of those in some detail with you, give you a few practical exercises you might like to consider. Let's have a look at show up first. Now, what do I mean by show up? Show up means that when you're with the other person, in fact, anybody for that matter, show up means be there in that moment. So if you're having a conversation with someone, be there. In other words, if you're looking at your iPhone, or you're staring over the shoulders of the person, or you're doodling, or all of these distractive behaviors that we're all guilty of it from time to time, then you're not in the moment. You're not in the conversation. That, of course, sends a very clear signal to the other person that I really either A, don't want to be here, or B, I have other more important things that I should be doing rather than sitting here listening to you and having a conversation. Now, if it's good enough to have a conversation with someone, it's good enough to be right there at that time. Otherwise, don't waste your time having a conversation. We talked a little bit about this earlier on in the Lunch and Learn series around the whole notion of be in the moment and give the person 100% attention that you're having a conversation with, because you know and I know that when we're talking to another person and they're not listening to us because their mind's wandering somewhere else, we know that. And it's very disconcerting when it happens to us. So you can imagine it'd be very disconcerting to someone else when we do the same thing. So it's really important to show up and give that person 100% attention. Now, I think we touched on this earlier in the Lunch and Learn series. When you speak, you could speak at about 120 to 180 words a minute, yet your brain will operate and function at around processing words around 450 to 600 words a minute. So it's very easy to say to people, you need to listen to people and give them 100% attention, but our brain is moving at such a rapid rate that we get bored. And so we tune out, and you're probably tuning out to me right now and thinking about something else that you should be doing, because I'm not speaking fast enough for your brain, and your brain is wandering and wanting to do other things. So it's extremely important to give the person your undivided attention. And that, so what that means is if there's a ding on your phone, you don't look at it. All right, your phone shouldn't be anywhere near where you can look at it anyway, but you are there in the moment, and I find that's really, really important to acknowledge. So showing up is really important. That's step one. What's step two? Step two, as you could probably imagine, is listen up, and that means give the person 100%, not only undivided attention, but listen to what they have to say. Listening is the most flattering thing that you can do for another person, because you're actually giving that person, you're giving the person the perception that they're the center of the world, they're the center of attention. So listening up is really, really important. Now, the best way to demonstrate how you can listen up to somebody else is by using the concept of paraphrasing. And I don't think enough of us use this, and we've all learnt it, and we've all gone to courses, or we've read books about it. The question, of course, is whether we're using it and whether we're doing it. And paraphrasing is a very simple concept where you, in your own words, let the other person know what you've heard them say. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it is not the point. The point is to use your own words to express, in summary, the message that you've heard from the other person. Now, I like to use the phrase, in other words, but that's me. You might have your own phrase. So I might say, so in other words, you got frustrated because you found it difficult to find the right person to make contact with to get the right information, and that's why the report was late. So by doing that, you're actually doing three really fundamental things, and three very important things in terms of your relationship with the other person. The first thing you're doing is by paraphrasing someone else. Now, when I say paraphrasing, I'm saying during the conversation, not at the end. This is not a summary. As they go through and as they draw breath, you then punctuate that by paraphrasing what you have heard. It's not condescending. It's actually a very affirming type of thing to do, because it does three things. First of all, what you're doing is you're checking to make sure that you're understood. if I get it wrong, the other person can then correct the message that I've received. So if I say, so in other words, you had difficulty getting the right information at the right time because it wasn't clear who it was that you should be talking to about that. Now, if I've missed the point there, the person, of course, can then correct me and say, no, there's more to it than that, or whatever. But if I get it right, then I have affirmed to the other person that not only do I understand what they're saying, that they know that I understand what they're saying, which is really important. The second thing, of course, is that is that you show them that you understand what they're saying. That's a good thing to do. Okay, I'm just getting a little message here that the sound's dropping in and out. Look, I'll just plow on. Thanks, Kelly, for letting me know. I don't know how others are going with this, but just got a message here that it's dropping in and out a bit. Not much I can do at this stage. We're at the mercy of the internet. Yeah, Kelly, look, it could be anything really. It's just unfortunately one of the facts of life that we have to deal with in relation to working through an internet. So it could be there, it could be here, it could be anywhere. But anyway, look, I'll just keep ploughing on and we'll see how we go. So you're showing people that you understand. Now that's important because you want them to know that you do understand. That's an important thing to do. And then the third really important point about this is that you can then take control of the conversation. Now what I mean by that is that let's say that someone spent 10 minutes telling you something, and to their mind it's very important, and as soon as they've drawn breath, you can then paraphrase. Now, the paraphrase is like a punctuation mark, like a full stop. So what you've done by doing that means that you can then take the conversation or steer the conversation wherever you want to take it. It gives you that opportunity to control the conversation. When I talk about controlling the conversation, I'm talking about sort of redirecting it. So it might be that, you've got something that you want to say, or maybe you want to talk about the solution to the problem that you've discussed. Whatever it might be, you can take it where you want it to go. So they're the three key reasons that we paraphrase. So my suggestion to you, and maybe a little bit of homework that you might like to try, is this afternoon, and I'm sure you'll get the opportunity to do this, the next time you're talking to someone, just try and experiment and throw in a paraphrase. Particularly if the other person's being long-winded and so forth, just throw in a paraphrase. You'll be quite pleasantly surprised at how well it will go. But unfortunately, we don't do it enough. I think sometimes we're a little bit afraid of what the other person might think or whatever. But in actual fact, it's a very affirming and flattering thing to do. So you're actually doing it very genuinely. It's not as if some technique. You're actually trying to build a rapport with the other person. So that helps in your relationships, absolutely. Now, the third of the 5 steps is to speak up. Now, what I mean by speak up is that you've got to be open and clear with people. I think too many times what we do is we don't want to open a can of worms or let sleeping dogs lie or whatever it might be, these sorts of things. We do this and so what happens is that the relationship never strengthens because they're not putting on the table something that we feel is important to put on the table. So my suggestion to you at this stage is that you should put things on the table, obviously in a diplomatic or tactful way, but nevertheless you should speak up. Because if you don't speak up, then the thing festers, the other person doesn't know that you have noticed whatever it is. It's not going to help the relationship by you not speaking up. Sometimes when we say clear the air, it's actually a good thing. All right. So if somebody has offended you in some way and done something inappropriate or wrong, and they don't know that they've done that, maybe it was an accident, maybe it wasn't, it's perfectly reasonable for you to explain that to the other person. It's perfectly reasonable for you to broach that subject. In fact, you should broach that subject, because if you're only ever just skimming the surface on topics, what's going to happen is that the relationship will never strengthen. And that's something I want you to think about, at a deeper level. So we do have this, look, I went too far. Let me go back a bit. We do have this notion of being afraid of bringing emotion up, and we're terrified of broaching subjects that might cause a problem. But the reality is, by not bringing it up, it's not making it any better. You really need to take a deep breath and to raise the topic that you're concerned about. It's not going to help things by you not raising it. And I think that's a very valid point that I'd like you to have a think about. Now, of course, different people will deal with this in different ways. I've got another lunch and learn on conflict coming up, and people sometimes feel uncomfortable raising these topics. A lot of people do, but if you don't raise them, it's not going to get any better. So be prepared to be authentic and open and communicate your concerns. I'm sure it's true to say that we all know people who we respect highly, who've got this capacity to speak the truth. And we appreciate it, we admire it, we respect it. We might get a little jolt every now and again from them being so open and frank. But at the end of the day, we feel psychologically safe because that person is willing to share with us their concerns. And I would ask that you do the same thing. It's not going to make things better by you keeping quiet. That's my point, I guess. Okay, Kelly, I just wanted to check. How's the sound now? Is it better? Are things better now or not? I guess if I don't get an answer from you, it'll say it'll probably answer the question of not. Okay, much better. Thanks. Thanks, Kelly. I'm pleased. All right, so step 3 is that you speak up when you need to speak up. And look, the quid pro quo around that, of course, is that when other people have got information to share with you, maybe some constructive criticism they share with you, it's a good idea that you listen to that before you get defensive. In fact, don't get defensive at all, but take in a deep breath and listen to what's being said, because there might be something in there that's relevant that you need to listen to. Okay, so speak up works on both sides. It's not just you speaking up, but it's allowing other people to feel comfortable speaking up as well. So the other problem, of course, with this is that if we have restricted information channels, that is, if we don't communicate information with people, or we restrict information, or we don't tell people what's going on, that's not going to help build a good working relationship up with the other person. So we need to be open with people. Of course, there's things that you can't tell people that need to be kept quiet and confidential in the workplace. We all understand that, including the persons that you have a working relationship with. But the reality is there are a lot of things that can be communicated that aren't communicated, and for whatever reason we don't. So be open with people. And I think being open with people will go a long way to building better working relationships up with people. Just be prepared to open up. Yes, of course, there's a risk, but certainly I can tell you now, there's a risk in not doing it. It means that the quality of your working relationships aren't where they need to be. So just be open with people and share information. Number 4 on the list is lift up. And I guess what I mean by lift up is, try and leave the conversation you have with the other person whom you may not have the best working relationship with. Leave the conversation on a positive note, and you can do that. One of the ways you can do that, is simple ways that we've got there on the screen, is just to simply say thank you. You might say thank you for being open and sharing your concern with me. Thank you for going out of your way the other day and speaking up in the meeting. I appreciate it. So by doing this, what you're doing is you're affirming the behaviours that are positive in what the other person's doing, because they're not mind readers. They don't know that you appreciate those things. Now you might say, well, I haven't got anything I can thank them for. Well, look a bit harder, because it's there. You can find it. So it's a good thing. It's a good affirming thing to do. All right. So just thanking people for being open with you in a meeting is, positive. It's uplifting. Acknowledge their contribution. Let them know that you appreciate what they're doing. Acknowledge the work that they're doing in this sphere, whatever it might be. Appreciate people's, or express gratitude for people's candor. As I said earlier, if people are open with you and they're prepared to be open with you, let them know that you appreciate that, because they're taking a risk. If someone's open with you, whenever we open up to other people, we are actually taking a risk. The risk is that the other person may reject us by us being open, and that's why, of course, none of us are as open as we perhaps could be, because we're always worried about the risk of being open. But just be open with people, but also appreciate and acknowledge when people are open with you can go a long way. Leave the person feeling respected and valued. So, when I've had this morning I was online with a client, and the first thing I said to the person, I've never met them before, first thing I said is, thank you for giving up some time today to talk to me. And then at the end of the conversation, I just simply said, and it was just automatic, it's not some technique, I said, thank you for the time you've spent with me today. I appreciate it. Simple little things like that can go a long way, and I think sometimes we don't do these things, even though we may well think it. So I'm just simply asking you to express it rather than anything else. Okay. So we've got lift up as well. The next one, the final one, is follow up. Now, follow up is very important when we're trying to build good working relationships with other people. Follow-up means that you find an opportunity to meet with that person again. And often what I do in these sorts of scenarios is I leave the door open at the end of the conversation by saying to the other person, look, let's catch up again in a fortnight and we'll review where we're up to. So I've left the door open. So if I do tap them on the shoulder or send them an email asking to meet, it's not going to be a huge surprise to the other person, because I've already flagged that at our last meeting. So try to do that. It makes a big difference, and everyone gets something from it. Everyone gets something out of it by doing that. So it's follow up, follow up, follow up. The more times you can follow up with those people that you have perhaps working relationships that aren't quite where they need to be, the better off you'll be in moving in the right direction. So I'll just stop there for a moment and just see if anyone has got any questions they want to ask me at this point about any of these things, any of these 5 steps. All right, no, all good, or maybe people are still typing. Okay, so I often had a very wise consultant who said to me that the purpose of a meeting is to try to book another meeting. I thought that was a great way of putting it. And I think what we're trying to do is to keep this ongoing dialogue going, and particularly with those people that we might be having maybe some challenges with in terms of building a good working relationship up with. So here are some other barriers. Now, I went through some of these barriers with you early on in the Lunch and Learn program, but they are very applicable when it comes to relationship building. So I'm going to share some of them again with you, and I'd like you to have a think about them as we go through today. You need to be giving people frank and fearless feedback. I mean, I did talk about positive feedback, and I did talk about constructive feedback. Most of us have trouble with constructive feedback, but I'd have to say that not many of us give positive feedback either. So if you've got some feedback that you want to give the other person that you're trying to build a good working relationship up with, then do so, because it will strengthen the relationship in the long run. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long run it will. It's like an investment. One of the questions that you might like to ask people, and particularly if they're a team member, say you don't have a good working relationship with a team member, then organise a time to meet and then ask this person this question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10's high, 1's low, how do you rate our current working relationship? Now, they'll probably be set back by the question because they weren't expecting it, and it's a rather unusual question, but it's a very good question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate our current working relationship? Now, if the person said 6, whatever they might say, it doesn't really matter so much. The next question is, do you mind if I ask why you rated it a 6? This gives us a chance to open up a conversation about how we might improve our working relationship with the other person who happens to be a team member. All right, so I think that's a great way of opening the door. And you can then say to the other person, is there anything that I'm doing or not doing that might improve our working relationship? So all the emphasis is on me here. I've asked the question on the scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate our current working relationship? They've given me a score and a rationale, and then I'm now going to say to them, is there anything that I can do or not do that'll help improve our working relationship? So there's nothing there in terms of attacking the other person or anything like that. Then I might turn the conversation around using paraphrasing to then talk about some things that I might find beneficial in terms of improving the working relationship we have with each other, you see. So you've got this constructive conversation going on about the relationship. Normally people don't talk about the relationship, they talk about everything else but the relationship. But the elephant in the room is the working relationship. So that's the thing we should be doing, putting the work in. That's where we should be putting our time in. I also think if you're trying to build good working relationships up with other people, then you should be asking questions. And the questions are why, what, when, who, where, how, and which, all open-ended questions. What you're trying to do is to create a dialogue with the other person. Don't wait for them to create the dialogue, then you jump in and ask. For example, I might say, look, I'm curious, why did you say that? Or what did you mean when you said X? Or when did this take place? By doing this, you are opening up a two-way dialogue. Otherwise, it could well become a monologue where there's just one of you talking and the other one's just sitting there passively listening or maybe not listening. So try to use questions to draw out the other person, and you know, I have no doubt that you can do that. It's not a difficult task to do. The best conversations that you can have, particularly when it comes to building good working relationships, are not in your office. I suggest that you go out and have a coffee, or you get out of the office, or at the very least find a neutral meeting ground where you can meet. Because the symbolism is, if you have a meeting in your office, you'll feel comfortable. Of course you will, because it's your territory. But the other person will feel less comfortable because it's not their territory. Now, obviously, if we're talking about building better working relationships up, you want the other person to feel comfortable, and you want to feel reasonably comfortable as well. So think carefully about where you have these conversations, and make sure that they're not held in your office, as safe as you may feel, because that's not the objective. The objective is around building a better working relationship up with the other person. Now, of course, the other thing that you mustn't do, and we talked about this early on in the Lunch and Learn series, is an over-reliance on email, when in fact you should be having conversations with people. You can't have a conversation via email that's very effective, because the technology is asynchronous, meaning, of course, that when you send the email, It'll be up to the individual to respond or not respond when they're ready. In other words, it has a limited capacity to have a two-way dialogue in real time. So you're far better off picking up the phone, or, in this day and age of Skype and Zoom and all the rest of it, is to, have a conference call, or better still, if you can do it, a face-to-face discussion. You'll learn more, you'll strengthen the relationship, you'll probably resolve the issue that you want to talk to them about a lot quicker by having a face-to-face or at least a telephone conversation. So consider that as an option. As I said previously, the average person spends 2.5 hours on email a day. So why would we want to increase that any more by having a pointless exercise of attempting to have conversations with other people because we're worried about documenting the information? If the trust level is so low that I'm afraid that I might, if I don't document this, I'm in trouble. Well, it's the relationship's well and truly in trouble, obviously. Now, the other thing, of course, I'd say is that often it's how other people in the office treat each other, which has a huge impact on your capacity to build good working relationships up. So if you're not a senior manager, and I know some of you are, but if you're not, it'll very much depend on taking your cues from senior managers and how they relate to each other. So if they're open with their conversations, then it's possible that you can be open as well. But if they're not, then you'll take their cues very much from them as such. And of course, the office layout can have a huge barrier to working relationships as well, because as I also indicated in the Lunch and Learn series, the whole open office environment doesn't lend itself for having open conversations, despite the fact that that was the whole purpose in the first place. The truth is that when you speak to someone in an open office environment, there may well be half a dozen or more people that can actually overhear the conversation that you're having with the other person. So it's not ideal in that sense, and it's far better to go and find a private space to have that conversation with other people rather than to sit there and not do it because you're worried about other people listening in, or ploughing ahead and you find it's just pretty superficial, the whole thing. So find the opportunity to meet somewhere else in relation to that. So folks, what we've covered today is we've looked at 5 key concepts. We've looked at showing up, which is giving yourself 100% undivided attention to the other person, is a massive move in the right direction. Listening up means using things like paraphrasing to let the other person know you've heard them, also to check to make sure that you did understand their key message, and of course to take control of the conversation so you can move on and talk about whatever the next point is you want to raise. Don't be afraid to speak up and to actually put on the table issues that of concern to you. I know it's not always easy to do this, but I can assure you that if you're honest with yourself, you would understand that it's otherwise nothing's going to change. It would probably very much depend on the necessity to have a good working relationship with this individual as to whether or not you would do this. But I guess the corollary of that is that might be one of the reasons you're not putting it on the table, because you may be concerned that it might be taken the wrong way or whatever. Make sure that you are positive and affirming in your conversations with people. By doing that out of sheer, just simple courtesies like thank you, showing gratitude, and so forth. By doing that, you are, of course, doing your bit in building a good working relationship. And a point I'd want to make about this is that a relationship is a two-way process. So you have 50% of the responsibility for building a good working relationship up with somebody else. And guess what? Yes, they have 50% of the responsibility of building a good working relationship up with you. So all you can do in this process is to do your best by, keeping your side of the bargain. Now, if you do all of that and you find that the relationship isn't working, then you can at least be comfortable with the notion that you've done your bit, you've made an effort, you've done some of the things that need to be done to at least advance the conversation. And hopefully it will make some difference. And I think you'll find it will, and it normally does. And it's no good having this Mexican standoff view, that thinking to yourself, well, look, when they do this, I'll do that. Because if you think like that, they're probably thinking the same thing as well, so nothing changes. Somebody's got to dip in and try to improve the working relationship. So lifting up is important, and the final point there was to follow up. And follow up simply means to make sure that you leave the door open at the end of the conversation, whatever it might be, that you would be willing to have another conversation with them to perhaps review progress or whatever. So for example, if I sat down with one of my team members and asked them the question, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10's high, 1's low, how would you rate our current working relationship? And they rated it a 6, and we had a good discussion about why it was a 6. We had a good discussion about what I could do to help improve the working relationship, and what they can do as well. So we've had a pretty constructive conversation. At the end of that conversation, I should say to the other person as their leader, look, let's agree to meet again in a month's time and just to review where we're up to. Now, you'll probably find that the other person will nod or agree, so there won't be a problem with that. And if you do that, then you've opened that doorway. And of course, the most important thing now to do is to follow up, and to make sure that you do follow up with the other person. Otherwise, the opportunity has lost. So that's what I'm getting at there. So, folks, your homework. Okay, now there is an online survey. Sorry, we've gone fairly quickly today. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to, any sort of difficult situations you want to throw out there, now's your chance to ask, because I've got a bit of time here before we finish up. So if you want to just ask me a question, type away. I'll get to see it, and I'll do what I can to answer it if I can. But I think what I'd like you to do is to go onto the learning platform at the end of this. I'll send you an email out this afternoon reminding you of this. I'd like you to go on there. There's an online survey I'd like you to complete. And then, of course, what the other bit of homework I'd like you to try, of course, is to find the opportunity, which you'll probably have this afternoon, as I said, where you can practice these 5 steps, and then find opportunities to use the concepts that we've talked about with the people that you're trying to build good working relationships up with. So that's the homework. So hopefully that will work out for you. Okay, so folks, we have covered a lot of territory over the last several months. I'm sure you'd agree. And I'll just do a very quick recap, if I may, and then we're done. And I'll give you a sort of a moratorium on how long I'll keep the learning platform open for you in the email I sent you this afternoon. But way back in Unit 1, we talked about being an authentic leader. And I shared with you 5 different steps in being authentic. And the argument there was pretty straightforward, and that is, if you're trying to have better conversations with people, you need to be authentic. People genuinely admire people who are authentic. In fact, ironically, it's very rare to be authentic. And so the first step is to understand what authenticity looks like, and that's what I covered in Unit 1. In Unit 2, I talked about the 5 conversations framework, and what I was giving you there is a kind of a framework that you can use for regular check-ins with your people. If you're interested in applying the 5 conversations framework in your organization overall to perhaps replace the performance review or to supplement it, then contact me offline and we can talk about how we can do that. So the 5 conversations was an opportunity for you to indulge in some developmental conversations once a month or a fortnight, whatever works for you, to build up that natural rapport with your team members. And you'll find that it works extremely well. That's been the feedback I've had from everywhere. In Unit 3, we talked about using GROW, and you might recall I actually gave you a coaching session during Unit 3 using GROW. GROW stands for goal, reality, options, and what next. It's a wonderful tool to coach people to make sure that they take accountability for their learning and it's not all just left on your shoulders. I talked about the analogy of the monkey on your back and the idea that your job is not to take the monkey when people come and see you, but rather to get that person to be accountable for solving their own problems. So the coaching conversation, I hope you've had a chance to use that. And in Unit 4, we talked about the need for visioning and purpose conversations to improve engagement. I guess my point was we need to explain the why of work. Why am I asking you to write this report? Why is this important? What would be the consequences if this wasn't done correctly? All of those key questions are things that leaders must indulge in order to get the best from their team members so that people understand and have a bigger picture of the work that they do. In Unit 5, which was 2 weeks ago, we talked about encouraging conversations. Most human beings are very insecure, and the reality is by being insecure, people often need encouragement. And your job as a leader is to have those encouraging conversations. Let people know that you believe in them. Let people know that you basically believe that they can do the work that you give them to do. Because a lot of people don't suffer from a superiority complex, despite what it might seem. They suffer from an inferiority complex. They don't believe that they're good enough. Sometimes people mask the inferiority complex with a bit of bravado and it makes it look like they've got a superiority complex. But I can assure you the majority of people underestimate their capacity, not overestimate it. Your job as a leader is to build people up as much as you can, recognize their strengths and work with that. And of course, today we talked about the relationship conversation. So folks, that's it from me. You're very quiet today, but that's all right. Thank you very much for the opportunity of working with you. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed your questions. I've enjoyed your interaction in between meetings. It's been fun. If you've got other people in your organisation that would benefit from the Lunch and Learn series, I've always got many of these running at different times. Just keep your eyes peeled for my newsletter. So thanks everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for the opportunity of working with you. And just remember the very best thing is to bring your best self to work. Thank you, Moya. I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. Thanks, Darren. You're probably getting sick of hearing my voice. You've been on a few of these, but thanks anyway. I appreciate it, Darren. Thank you. So enjoy, and if you've got other people that you think would benefit from the Lunch and Learn series, just swing them my way and keep your eyes peeled on the newsletter. All right, so all the best, and and as I said, keep your eyes peeled for the email I'll send you, which of course will just let you know that the slides and the recording are up online, and I'll give you a sort of a deadline as to when you can use that before I take your name down. All right, thanks everyone, all the best, and stay positive. Thank you and goodbye.